Oliver had always been drawn to the sea. Growing up in a small coastal town, he spent countless hours on the beach, exploring tide pools and diving into the surf. As an adult, he became a marine biologist, dedicating his life to studying the mysteries of the deep ocean. When he received a grant to investigate a recently discovered trench off the coast of his hometown, he jumped at the opportunity. The trench, dubbed the Abyss, was deeper than the Mariana Trench and surrounded by strange and uncharted waters. Oliver assembled a team of experts and secured a research vessel, the Odyssey. They set sail on a clear morning, the sun reflecting off the calm sea. For days, they conducted routine dives and collected samples. But as they neared the Abyss, strange things began to happen. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, and the crew reported hearing eerie sounds coming from the water at night. Oliver dismissed these incidents as stress-induced hallucinations, a common occurrence on long voyages. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Oliver decided to dive into the Abyss himself. He wanted to be the first to see its depths and discover what secrets it held. He suited up in his diving gear, checked his oxygen levels, and gave the signal to be lowered into the water. As he descended, the light from the surface faded and the water grew colder. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing strange, luminescent creatures that darted away as he approached. He felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. At a depth of nearly 10,000 feet, he reached the edge of the trench. It yawned before him, a black maw stretching into the unknown. Oliver began to explore the trench's edge, collecting samples and taking notes. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered and went out. He tapped it, but it remained dark. Panic gripped him for a moment before he remembered his backup light. He switched it on and continued his work, but the feeling of unease lingered. Minutes later, his radio crackled. "Oliver, do you copy? You're descending too fast. Ascend immediately." Oliver frowned. He hadn't touched his controls. He checked his instruments and realized with horror that he was indeed sinking deeper into the trench. He tried to activate his ascent thrusters, but they were unresponsive. He radioed back, "I have a malfunction. Controls are not responding. I'm trying to manually ascend." "Roger that. We're preparing to pull you up manually," the voice from the Odyssey replied. As Oliver struggled with his equipment, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Something large was drifting toward him from the darkness. He turned to face it, his heart pounding. A massive, shadowy figure loomed before him, its shape indistinct but menacing. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. A monstrous entity from the ocean's darkest depths. Before he could react, the creature lunged at him, wrapping him in tentacle-like appendages. Oliver screamed into his radio, but his voice was drowned out by the crushing pressure of the deep. He felt his consciousness slipping away as the creature dragged him deeper into the trench. When he awoke, he was back on the Odyssey, surrounded by his concerned crew. He had no memory of how he had escaped or how he had been brought back to the surface. His diving suit was torn and covered in strange, bioluminescent slime. The crew reported that they had found him unconscious, floating near the surface with no sign of the creature. Shaken but determined, Oliver reviewed the footage from his helmet camera. The video was corrupted, showing only static and brief flashes of the trench. However, in one frame, he glimpsed a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. As the Odyssey sailed back to port, Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking just beneath the waves. He knew that the ocean held many secrets, but now he understood that some were better left undiscovered. When they reached the shore, Oliver resigned from his position and left the town without a word. He moved inland, far from any body of water, haunted by nightmares of the trench and the creature within. He could never forget the feeling of those tentacles wrapping around him, pulling him into the abyss. Years passed, but the nightmares never ceased. Oliver tried to rebuild his life, taking up a quiet job in a library in a small landlocked town. His colleagues noticed his withdrawn demeanor, but knew better than to pry. He never spoke about his time at sea, and any mention of the ocean would cause his eyes to cloud with fear. One winter night, as Oliver was closing up the library, he noticed a familiar face in the shadows of the dimly lit street outside. It was Dr. Miriam Hale, one of his former colleagues from the Odyssey. She looked older, her face lined with worry and fatigue. "Miriam," he greeted her cautiously. "What brings you here?" "I need to talk to you, Oliver," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about the Abyss." Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't heard that name in years. "I thought I left all that behind," he said, turning to lock the library door. "You may have, but it hasn't left you," Miriam replied, her eyes dark with concern. "Strange things have been happening. The others, they've disappeared one by one." Oliver felt a wave of nausea. He had kept in sporadic contact with the crew after leaving, but he hadn't heard from them in months. Disappeared? How? Miriam shook her head. "No one knows. They vanished without a trace, just like you almost did." Oliver invited her into the library, and they sat down in the quiet, dimly lit room. Miriam pulled out a small, tattered notebook and handed it to him. This belonged to Captain Reynolds. It was found in his quarters after he went missing. Oliver opened the notebook. The pages were filled with frantic scribbles, drawings of monstrous sea creatures, and disturbing notes. One entry stood out. "They are calling me. I hear them in my dreams. The abyss is not just a place. It's alive, and it's coming for us." "We need to go back," Miriam said urgently. "We need to find out what's really down there, and we need to stop it before it takes us all." Oliver felt a surge of fear, but also a sense of responsibility. He couldn't ignore the plight of his former crew. He nodded reluctantly. "All right, but we do this carefully. No risks." They gathered what resources they could and set out for the coast. It was a grim reunion with the sea for Oliver, but determination drove him forward. They hired a small, discreet vessel and a skeleton crew, and within days, they were back at the edge of the abyss. The journey was fraught with tension. The crew, sensing the gravity of the mission, worked silently and efficiently. Oliver and Miriam spent hours reviewing old data and planning their dive. This time, they would go together. As they descended into the trench, the familiar darkness closed in around them. Oliver's heart raced, but he steeled himself, focusing on the mission. They reached the same depth as before, and their lights illuminated the hauntingly beautiful yet alien landscape of the trench. Suddenly, the water around them grew colder, and the lights began to flicker. Oliver felt a familiar sense of dread. "It's here," he whispered to Miriam over the radio. Before she could respond, the creature emerged from the shadows, more terrifying than Oliver remembered. Its eyes glowed with malevolent intelligence, and it moved with a predatory grace. Oliver and Miriam tried to ascend, but the creature was too fast. It wrapped its tentacles around their submersible, crushing it with immense pressure. Just as Oliver thought it was the end, Miriam activated a device they had brought, a high-frequency emitter designed to repel marine life. The creature recoiled, its grip loosening enough for them to break free. They began their ascent, the creature trailing them but kept at bay by the emitter's pulses. They burst to the surface, gasping for air. The crew pulled them aboard, and they wasted no time setting sail for the shore. The creature did not follow. Back on land, Oliver and Miriam knew their ordeal wasn't over. They couldn't rest until the abyss's secret was fully understood and neutralized. They took their findings to the scientific community, hoping to rally support for a larger, more equipped expedition. The nightmares persisted, but now Oliver had a mission. The ocean's call was not just a whisper in his dreams, but a roar in his waking mind. The abyss had marked him, and he would not stop until he unraveled its mysteries and ensured no one else suffered its horrors. John had always felt a strange connection to the ocean. As a marine biologist, he spent countless hours studying its depths and marveling at the creatures that inhabited its waters. But as much as he loved the sea, he also respected its power and its mysteries. This particular summer, John had been granted a rare opportunity to explore the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the world's oceans. It was a dream come true, but it would soon become a nightmare he couldn't escape. The expedition team consisted of 5 members: John, Dr. Eleanor Marks, a seasoned oceanographer; Mark Davis, a deep-sea engineer; Lisa Nguyen, a marine geologist; and the expedition leader, Captain Eric Saunders. They had all gathered on the research vessel Nautilus, eagerly preparing for the descent into the trench. "Are you ready, John?" Eleanor asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. John nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and unease. "As ready as I'll ever be." The descent began smoothly. The submersible, Deep Quest, was a marvel of modern engineering, designed to withstand the immense pressure of the deep ocean. As they descended into the inky blackness, John couldn't help but feel a growing sense of foreboding. Hours passed, and the submersible finally touched down on the ocean floor. The lights revealed a desolate alien landscape, devoid of the vibrant life found in shallower waters. They began their exploration, collecting samples and documenting their findings. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a peculiar formation in the distance. It appeared to be a massive ancient structure, partially buried in the sediment. "Is that a building?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It looks man-made," Eleanor added, her brow furrowed in concentration. Captain Saunders guided the submersible closer, the lights illuminating more of the structure. It was indeed an ancient, crumbling edifice, covered in strange symbols and carvings that none of them could decipher. "This is incredible," John whispered, unable to tear his eyes away from the eerie sight. Suddenly, the submersible lurched, and a loud creaking noise filled the cabin. "What's happening?" Eleanor shouted, gripping her seat. "We're caught on something," Saunders replied, his voice tense. "Mark, can you see what's going on?" Mark checked the external cameras. "It looks like some kind of cable, or vine. It's wrapped around our thruster." "Can we cut it loose?" John asked, his heart pounding. "I'll try," Mark said, activating the submersible's robotic arm. But as the arm moved closer to the entanglement, the submersible jolted violently, throwing them all against their seats. "We're being pulled," Saunders yelled, frantically trying to stabilize the craft. The lights flickered, and John saw something that made his blood run cold. Emerging from the darkness was a massive, shadowy figure, its form obscured by the murky water. It had long, sinuous limbs that writhed and twisted, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Get us out of here!" Eleanor screamed, her voice rising in panic. Saunders pushed the thrusters to their limit, but the submersible was dragged deeper into the trench, the pressure gauges climbing alarmingly. "We're going to be crushed," Lisa cried, tears streaming down her face. The submersible groaned under the strain, and John felt a crushing weight on his chest. Just when he thought they were doomed, the entanglement suddenly snapped, and the submersible shot upwards, propelled by the released tension. They ascended rapidly, the lights of the mysterious structure fading into the blackness below. The creature, or whatever it was, did not follow. Back on the Nautilus, the team was in shock. They had narrowly escaped with their lives, but the ordeal had left them shaken. "What was that thing?" Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," John replied, his mind racing. "But we need to report this." Eleanor nodded, her face pale. "We need to warn others. There's something down there, something we don't understand." As they relayed their harrowing experience to the authorities, John couldn't shake the feeling that they had disturbed something ancient and malevolent. He knew he would never look at the ocean the same way again. The depths held secrets that were better left undisturbed, and he had no intention of returning to the Mariana Trench ever again. The days following their return were filled with debriefings and interviews. The scientific community was both fascinated and skeptical about their encounter. The footage captured by the submersible, though murky, showed glimpses of the mysterious structure and the shadowy figure, lending some credence to their story. Despite the skepticism, the team's accounts remained consistent. John, Eleanor, Mark, Lisa, and Captain Saunders were hailed as pioneers, but they were also haunted by what they had seen. The experience had left an indelible mark on each of them. Weeks turned into months, and John tried to resume his normal life, diving into research and teaching. But the memory of the trench gnawed at him. He often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, visions of the glowing eyes and writhing limbs haunting his dreams. One evening, as John was preparing to leave his office, he received a call from Eleanor. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice urgent. "What is it, Eleanor?" he asked, his heart rate quickening. "There's been a development. I found something disturbing," she replied, her voice shaking slightly. "Can you come over?" John agreed and drove to Eleanor's apartment. When he arrived, she greeted him with a grim expression and led him to her study. Spread out on the desk were ancient maps, old manuscripts, and recent satellite images of the Mariana Trench. "What is all this?" John asked, feeling a sense of dread. "I've been researching that structure we saw," Eleanor said. "It's not just an isolated building. Look here." She pointed to a satellite image. "These patterns suggest an entire submerged city, stretching miles across the trench." John stared at the images, trying to comprehend the scale of what she was suggesting. "A city? But how old is it?" Eleanor shook her head. "Older than any known civilization. And these manuscripts," she pointed to the weathered papers, "they talk about an ancient race, predating humanity, that lived beneath the ocean. They worshipped something that demanded sacrifices." John felt a chill run down his spine. "You think what we saw was one of these gods? Or something they created," Eleanor replied. "But there's more. I found accounts of ships disappearing in that area, strange phenomena, even whispers of a curse. "This is insane," John muttered, but he couldn't dismiss the evidence before him. As they pored over the documents, the realization hit John. "We need to go back. We need to find out more." Eleanor looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "John, are you serious? After what happened last time?" "I know it's dangerous, but if there's an ancient civilization down there, we need to understand it. We need to warn the world." Reluctantly, Eleanor agreed. They contacted Mark, Lisa, and Captain Saunders, who, despite their reservations, felt the same pull to uncover the truth. Preparations began for a second expedition, this time with more advanced equipment and a larger team. The night before they were set to depart, John stood on the deck of the Nautilus, staring out at the dark, endless ocean. He felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. He knew they were venturing into the unknown, but the need for answers outweighed his dread. The descent into the trench was tense, the team's nerves on edge. They reached the ocean floor and began their exploration, retracing their previous path. As they approached the ancient structure, the submersible's lights illuminated more of the sunken city. It was even larger and more complex than they had imagined. Suddenly, the instruments went haywire. The submersible trembled, and the lights flickered. The shadowy figure appeared again, its glowing eyes fixated on them. But this time, it wasn't alone. Multiple entities emerged from the darkness, their forms twisting and writhing. "Get us out of here now," Captain Saunders shouted. The submersible struggled to ascend, the thrusters whining under the strain. The creatures closed in, their movements swift and menacing. Just as one of the entities reached out, a loud crack reverberated through the cabin, and the submersible lurched upward, breaking free from the creature's grasp. They ascended rapidly, the pressure gauges stabilizing as they reached safer depths. The team was silent, each member processing the terror they had just faced. As they surfaced, the weight of their discovery settled over them. Back on the Nautilus, John knew their findings would change everything. They had uncovered an ancient, malevolent force lurking in the depths, a force that had been disturbed by their intrusion. "We can't keep this to ourselves," John said, his voice resolute. "The world needs to know what's down there." Eleanor nodded, though fear still lingered in her eyes. "But we must tread carefully. The ocean holds secrets that humanity may not be ready to face." As the team prepared their report, John felt a sense of closure. They had faced the darkness and survived, but the ocean's depths would forever remain a place of mystery and fear. The trench had revealed its secrets, but at a cost that would haunt them for the rest of their lives.